Hello and welcome to an introduction to air quality. This module is brought to you by the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program, which is part of the Energy and Environment Cabinet. Air is essential for life. A person can go weeks without food and a few days without water, but would only last a few minutes without air. One person breathes over 3,000 gallons of air a day, but breathing polluted air can make you sick. As shown by the chart, breathing polluted air can have a wide range of negative health effects on the body. Whether or not a person experiences any of these adverse effects depends on a number of factors, including the amount of pollution, type of pollutant, and length of exposure. Individuals can have different levels of susceptibility due to age or other pre-existing conditions. Other pollutants make their way up into the atmosphere, causing a thinning of the protective ozone layer. This has led to changes in the environment, as well as dramatic increases in skin cancers and cataracts. An important thing to remember about air pollution is that it affects not just the air, but water and soils. Air pollutants are readily dispersed and do not always occur within the location of origin. Air pollutants eventually settle out and land in the soil that grows vegetables you eat and in the water you drink. The economic impacts of air pollution are significant. Each day, air pollution causes thousands of illnesses, leading to lost days at work and school. Air pollution also reduces agricultural crop and commercial forest yields by billions of dollars each year. Air pollutants can come from a wide array of sources, classified as natural, mobile, and stationary. We will talk about each one of these types of sources. Natural sources of air pollution include wind-blown dust, wildfires, volcanoes, and lightning, which can produce low-level ozone. Mobile and stationary sources are man-made. Mobile sources include the burning of fossil fuels for automobile engines. Stationary sources are fixed to a single location, such as factories or power plants. Motor vehicles produce more air pollution than any other single human activity, while stationary sources emit sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide that can cause acid rain, not to mention ozone-damaging chlorofluorocarbons and polychlorinated biphenyls, which are highly toxic industrial compounds. The types and number of pollutants emitted into the air can be harmful and even fatal, as shown by these examples. Thousands of people became sick in Donora, Pennsylvania, when a thick cloud of air pollution formed above the town, while 3,000 people died in London's killer fog incident of 1952. Events like these alerted the world to the dangers air pollution posed to human health. Several federal and state laws were passed, including the original Clean Air Act of 1963, which established funding for the study and cleanup of air pollution. In 1967, the act was amended, allowing for federal enforcement of interstate transport of air pollutants and expanded research. The Clean Air Act of 1970 produced a major shift in the federal government's role in air pollution control and led to the development of 4 major regulatory programs: National Ambient Air Quality Standards, New Source Performance Standards, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollution, and state implementation plans were initiated to regulate stationary sources. In 1977, major amendments were added to the Clean Air Act that mainly focused on the prevention of significant deterioration, or PSD. Finally, the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 increased the authority and responsibility of the federal government and the control of acid rain and ozone protection, as well as authorizing a program to control 188 toxic pollutants, and establishing a permit program for larger industrial and commercial sources, Title V permits. The Clean Air Act is a federal law covering the entire country. However, states, tribes, and local governments do a lot of work to meet the Act's requirements. For example, representatives from these agencies work with companies to reduce air pollution. They also review and approve permit applications for industries or chemical processes. Under the Clean Air Act, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, sets limits on certain air pollutants, including setting limits on how much can be in the air anywhere in the United States. This helps to ensure basic health and environmental protection from air pollution for all Americans. The Clean Air Act also gives the EPA the authority to limit emissions of air pollutants coming from sources like chemical plants, utilities, and steel mills. Individual states or tribes may have their own stronger air pollution limits, but they must not be less stringent than those set by the EPA. The EPA assists state, tribal, and local agencies by providing research, expert studies, engineering designs, and funding to support clean air progress. State, local, and tribal governments also monitor air quality, inspect facilities under their jurisdictions, and enforce Clean Air Act regulations. As we can see, most states have developed state implementation plans, SIPs, that outline how they will control air pollution under the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act authorizes the EPA to establish National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS standards, for particulate matter, ground-level ozone, volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and lead, based on the protection of human health and the environment. The EPA calls these pollutants criteria air pollutants because permissible levels are based on human or environmental health criteria. This set of limits based on human health is called primary standards. Another set of limits intended to prevent environmental and property damage is called secondary standards. This slide provides an overlook of the criteria air pollutants, along with possible sources of those pollutants, as well as some associated health and environmental effects. Particulate matter is an important air pollutant, as the particles can travel deep into the lungs, causing a wide array of respiratory problems. Motor vehicles are responsible for 50% of smog-forming volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxide emissions, hazardous air pollutant emissions, and 75% of carbon monoxide emissions nationwide. The Clean Air Act takes a comprehensive approach to reducing pollution from these sources by requiring manufacturers to build cleaner engines, refiners to produce cleaner fuels, and certain areas with air pollution problems to adopt and run passenger vehicle inspection and maintenance programs. Unfortunately, air pollution does not recognize state or international boundaries. The Clean Air Act's Good Neighbor provision requires the EPA and states to address interstate transport of air pollution that affects downwind states' ability to attain and maintain national ambient air quality standards. The Clean Air Act requires each state in its state implementation plan to prohibit emissions that will significantly contribute to non-attainment of a NAAQS or interfere with the maintenance of a NAAQS in a downwind state. The Act provides for interstate commissions to develop regional strategies for cleaning up air pollution. The Clean Air Act also requires the EPA to work with states to reduce the regional haze that affects visibility in national parks and wilderness areas. During much of the year in these areas, a veil of white or brown haze hangs in the air, blurring the view. Most of this haze is not natural. It is air pollution carried by the wind, often many hundreds of miles from where it originated. Under the regional haze provisions of the Clean Air Act, the states and tribes, in coordination with the EPA, the National Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and others, develop and implement air quality protection plans to reduce the pollution that causes visibility impairments. air resource specialists at the national parks, who are also rangers that specialize in air pollution, present visitor programs, participate in air pollution monitoring, and provide information to visitors interested in air quality. You have probably heard of acid rain. However, you may not have heard of other forms of acid precipitation, such as acid snow, acid fog, or dry forms of acidic pollution, such as acid gas and acid dust. These are caused by sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides reacting to moisture in the air. Acid precipitation causes human health problems, hazy skies, environmental problems, and property damage. Toxic air pollutants, or air toxics, are known to cause or are suspected of causing cancer, birth defects, reproduction problems, and other serious illnesses. Exposure to certain toxic pollutants can even cause death. The 1990 Clean Air Act amendments required the EPA to identify categories of industrial sources for 188 listed toxic air pollutants, and to take steps to reduce pollution by requiring sources to install controls or change production processes. The 1990 Clean Air Act also required the EPA to set up a program for phasing out production and use of ozone-destroying chemicals. Ground-level ozone is a major component of smog. Approximately 10% of ozone is considered ground level. In 1996, U.S. production ended for many of the chemicals capable of doing the most serious harm, such as CFCs, halons, and methylchloroform. Remember, ozone is good up high and bad nearby. Operating permits issued by states and tribes include information on which pollutants are being released, how much may be released, and what kinds of steps the source's owner or operator is required to take to reduce the pollution. The 1990 amendments strengthened the EPA's power to enforce the Act, increasing the range of civil and criminal sanctions available. Public participation is a very important part of the 1990 Clean Air Act. Throughout the Act, different provisions give the public opportunities to take part in determining how the law is carried out. Often, when the EPA is working on a major rule, the agency will hold hearings in various cities across the country, at which the public can comment. You can also submit written comments directly to the EPA for inclusion in the public record associated with that rule. Reports required by the 1990 Clean Air Act are usually available to the public. Those reports include a great deal of information on how much pollution is being released by industrial and commercial sources. Monitoring data collected by the EPA, states, and tribes that measure the level of selected pollutants in a community's air are also available to the public. Information on air emissions and monitoring data can be found at the links provided on this slide. As we mentioned, Congress passed the Clean Air Act and its amendments, which gave authority to the EPA. The EPA regulates or delegates regulatory authority to the state. The state then has the authority to create environmental regulations that are at least as stringent as the federal requirements. Kentucky used that authority to create the Energy and Environment Cabinet and the Department for Environmental Protection to enforce air quality regulations. All of Kentucky's air quality regulations are housed in Title 401 of the Kentucky Administrative Regulations, KAR, Chapters 50 through 63. These potentially applicable regulations may have specific permitting implications and requirements. The first 4 regulations listed in this slide all outline the requirements and procedures involved with different types of air permits and applications. 401 KAR Chapters 59, Section 10 covers regulations for new sources, and 401 KAR Chapter 63 Section 20 deals with sources that may emit potentially hazardous materials. Facilities in Kentucky must follow federal regulations, such as new source performance standards and national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants. NSPS and ECAP are among the most common and are both important to understand because being subject to either can determine whether or not your facility needs a permit. New source performance standards dictate the level of pollution that a stationary source may produce, and they apply to new, modified, and reconstructed facilities. NSPS can be found in 40 CFR Part 60 and are developed and implemented by the EPA. Although delegated to the states, the EPA retains authority to implement and enforce the NSPS. National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants is pollutant specific for 188 compounds, which are known or suspected to cause cancer or other serious health effects. ECAP regulations can be found in 40 CFR Part 61 and 401 KAR Chapter 63, Section 60. Sources subject to ECAPs are required to perform an initial performance test to demonstrate compliance. To demonstrate continuous compliance, sources are generally required to monitor control device operating parameters, which are established during the initial performance test. Sources may also be required to install and operate continuous emission monitors to demonstrate compliance. Control technology levels are based on cost. Some more of the common ECAP rules include Subpart 4Z for reciprocating internal combustion engines, 6H associated with paint stripping and surface coating operations, 6J for industrial, commercial, and institutional boilers, and 6X, which applies to 9 metal fabrication and finishing area source categories. It is useful to know these because being in any of these categories automatically means you may need to at least have a registration. You can contact the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program with any general questions you have regarding a potential air quality permit. Small businesses can receive additional services when applying for an air quality permit. Facilities with questions about their specific air permits should reach out to the Division of Air Quality for more information. For more information about the Clean Air Act, I would encourage you to check out the EPA's Clean Air Act overview at the address provided. Kentucky's Environmental Compliance Assistance Program hopes you have enjoyed this module, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you. Have a good day.